Hello, everyone. So I wanted to pop in today. My hair is a hot mess today, but anyone else feeling kind of lazy today? For whatever reason, I feel such a heaviness in the energy today. Um, Coming into November. So I wanted to come on today to talk a little bit about what birth trauma is. And usually when we use the word trauma, a big image of like a car accident or someone like physically abusing you comes to mind, like some big event that was very damaging to you. And while those are true, trauma is really just any situation you experience that affects you emotionally, energetically, even physically, that goes unresolved and unaddressed. So, what does that mean? As a child, if you are raised in a family that emotions are suppressed and dismissed, and parents don't acknowledge your emotional your feelings and emotions around situations, you each time that happens, you shut down your emotional output a little bit more. And that blocks energy and stagnates energy within your system. And you actually hold those traumas physically in your body, within your energetic system, which then affects your emotional system and becomes physical manifestations over time. So even just having a caregiver, or both caregivers for that matter, who are emotionally unavailable to you and do not allow you a space to express yourself, that is a deep wound that continues through your childhood because those same parents are continuing to not allow that emotional expression. And then you become an adult who does not have the proper mechanisms in order to express and feel emotions properly. And that is where things like addictions manifest, which is really rooted in like grief and shame and guilt coming from that childhood of being unable to express your true self. And you take it on in yourself as in you're doing something wrong, because children don't understand the reasoning behind why a parent isn't emotionally available, because of course that parent learned that from their childhood of being emotionally suppressed as well. So that is that generational line of trauma. So that's a very common general example of trauma. That's a trauma that I've experienced as well. But when it comes to birth, what is trauma in birth? So the obvious one is C-section, um, interventions when you don't want them, but in like a more subtle scale, in birth, trauma is really, again, anything that you experience through pregnancy and the birth experience, even after birth and postpartum traumas continue to arise, because that is the time of mother healing and bonding with baby. And if things aren't addressed and resolved properly, that is where postpartum depression is so prominent, because the mother often goes unacknowledged and unheard in much of like her experience of birth, the experience where she likely has felt traumas. The emotions of mothers are very dismissed, in especially within the phrase of like, as long as baby's okay. Like mothers constantly say that, and people tell mothers that to really dismiss the experience of a mom if she's not perfectly happy and grateful that her baby is alive, as in having a baby alive is the only thing that matters, because it's not. Because if you're a new mother who's experienced a deal of traumas in this birth experience, you are not fully capable of showing up in the way that your baby deserves, and your other children if you have other children as well. So as a first-time mom, there's such a high rate of birth traumas because we come in with only what we've learned for the most part from our parents, friends, and like birth caregiver, essentially, who is taking care of you, who you've chosen as your caregiver. And like TV is a huge example as well. Our society in general has a very negative perception of birth, and it's not presented in the very empowering, wild, instinctual manner that it truly is when you are in birth. A woman in power, in her birth wisdom and liberated space, is very different than the births that we see oftentimes in TV. In my last video, I addressed that when I talked about the Handmaid's Tale birth stories, the parallel storyline that they had. And go back and listen to that if you haven't yet. I spoke about the parallel of two different birth stories they showed at the same time. And it's very indicative to what we see in our society now, as in the true powerful essence of like a wild birth in your womanhood and your strength versus this dehumanization of a woman where only the life of the baby matters. And from the moment you go into your first prenatal visit, if you choose those, which you really don't have to, by the way, that's part of the birth awakening sessions I'll talk about later. From the moment you step into a doctor's office, you are giving yourself over to these experts and powers that over that timeline present themselves as the control over you, because that's essentially what it comes down to, especially in a hospital birth. At the end of the day, you can write all of the birth, the, what's it called? I wrote one myself. Your plan, your birth plan of how you want things to go. You can write that all you want, but at the end of the day, in the hospital, they will essentially push you into complying to what they want you to do, because it's their protocols. They run by these basic protocols, and everybody is treated in the same way, of just kind of cycling people through the hospital. And you're just a number, essentially. Are there exceptions? Very few exceptions, I would say. Even in my experience with my first child, she was a wonderful and sensitive nurse midwife. And the big difference there is she is trained as a nurse first and then becomes a midwife in order to specialize in birth. So there's firstly trained in the medical mind and like the emergency mindset. And that is often where the medical professionals' minds go, is worst case scenarios. And that's how you are treated in medical events that may be appropriate. However, birth is not a medical event. So we must begin to step away from that model, because we should not be stepping into birth with the what ifs and the worst case scenarios in mind. Because the more that becomes thoughts in your being, and you allow that type of energy and frequency to come around you and attach to you, essentially, you begin to attach to these storylines. And those are more likely to play out once you take on so much of those worries and fears. And it obviously, when you experience them firsthand in, say, your first pregnancy, those fears carry over to any subsequent birth that you have. So in pregnancy and birth, anything you experience that is not fully consensual, is not what you truly desire in your birth, what does not fully empower you, bring you self-empowerment and control, and to allow your instinctual wisdom to be the guidance of your birth, basically anything else outside of that is and can be a trauma on you and your baby and the entire experience. So with birth trauma healing, we address your entire story. You're given the space to share your entire story, because often as a mother, looking as you're going through the experience, you likely don't often realize what is a trauma to you as you're experiencing it. Because if you're put in that space of like emergency, we have to do this and this and this, cervical checks, never needed. You don't ever need to be allowing anybody to put their hands inside of you at any point in your birth or pregnancy, ever. That alone is a sort of trauma to your physical and energetic body that we are made to believe that we have to allow for the safety of your baby, or something that's normal. It's normalized as part of the birth process when it shouldn't. It's not. It does not need to be. And I allowed that with my first, because there was interventions and things that happened in that one that I later realized were traumas to me. And then I no longer allowed it in my second two births. I never had any cervical checks whatsoever, nor our ultrasounds. That's more of an energetic trauma to your body and to the baby. So anything that really truly is an act of disempowerment will cause a sort of wound to your energetic and spiritual body. It does not have to be a physical trauma. So when you have a birth trauma healing session with me or a birth awakening session, really the only difference between those is the birth awakening is more of expanding into your perspective and views on birth, especially if you're a first-time mom, and being able to step into your power of creating the birth experience that you want, the free birth, home birth, however you see it in wild birth. Well, birth trauma healing is really focusing in on your specific birth story. So you share it with me, and simply the sharing, simply expressing your story to somebody, undisturbed, uninterrupted, not criticized in any way, shape, or form. Simply sharing that and expressing it, which women usually aren't truly given that authentic space to share the true feelings of their birth. We're often dismissive of our experiences. Like I said, dismissing the bad things because baby's alive. No, a birth trauma healing session is allowing the authentic expression of your birth to bring up the parts that have been a trauma to you, even if you don't realize it. And that is kind of my role in being able to see where you're speaking and how that may be a deeper wound to you, and allow you to sink deeper into those parts of your birth experience and allow the energy to move through. Crying is often a really simple way of simply just moving through the emotions and allowing a trauma to release. That is what I mean about an unresolved trauma, because simply being able to express freely allows resolution. So that is a pretty, I won't say quick breakdown, but there's a general breakdown of what I'm doing in birth awakening and birth trauma sessions. It doesn't really, you don't really have to pick one or the other, just a birth session, a healing session, to speak to your experience or to speak to the perspective that you've been raised to understand around birth, and the pull to knowing that there's something different that you want to find and you're seeking and you're stepping into as a woman, as a mother, and really liberating yourself from the medical system of birth, which is truly rooted in the disempowerment of women and mothers. So, to book a session, you can email me, go to my website. I'll have links below. Message me anytime if you have questions. And I look forward to holding space for any of you women out there who just need an open space to express yourself and feel heard, and to step into that wild role, that motherhood that you are destined to be and you are here for. So have a good day.